Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream where we're diving deep into the world of ADHD. This is a safe place for open and honest discussions about ADHD, and we want to provide valuable insights, share personal experiences, and create a supportive community for those impacted by the condition. Last week, we talked a lot about the stereotypes surrounding ADHD and surrounding hyperactivity. And there's a strong stereotype that ADHD is really something that's only present in hyperactive white boys, and that has an impact on diagnosis and underdiagnosis of people who don't fit that condition, that stereotype. This week, we're going to be digging a little bit deeper into how hyperactivity features in ADHD. Before we go forward, it's really important to acknowledge that hyperactivity is an important factor in current diagnostic criteria for ADHD. So at the moment, within many countries, ADHD is typically categorized in three ways: predominantly hyperactive impulsive, predominantly inattentive, or a combined presentation that has aspects of both. However, hyperactivity doesn't just manifest as a kind of constant motion or restless behavior. In fact, hyperactivity and ADHD can manifest as a kind of inner restlessness, as fidgeting, impulsivity, or an inability to sit still. But again, that varies from individual to individual. And that's why we've got a panel of educators who have ADHD who are going to share their ideas and experiences of hyperactivity with us today. A couple of final points before we proceed. We are very aware that talking about mental health and talking about neurodevelopmental conditions can be quite triggering. So if at any point you do feel triggered by any of the content, please, take a moment to step away, try to seek some help from perhaps a friend or a family member, or even from a medical professional. We'll also be sharing a list of resources at the end of the session to provide a bit more help and insight around the condition. And throughout the stream, we'll be asking you to share your questions and comments. So please do feel free to put anything you want to in the comments. Your voice is really important, and your questions could lead to valuable insights or, for other people who are tuning in. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you also to the panel members who are joining us. So shall we start with some introductions? First of all, Sarah, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Lottie, first of all. Hi, I'm Sarah. I am based in Greece and I'm originally from Wales. I have ADHD, of course. This is why I'm here. I'm an educator that works predominantly with teachers in their development. And I work together with a colleague, C Steele. We have our own company called Daltonics, and we do a lot of stuff around inclusive and diverse teaching practices, including how to accommodate people, students with ADHD. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Claire, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Claire Hart. I'm originally from England, but I live in Germany. My main job is working in educational publishing, and I also work with teachers to educate them about neurodiversity. I live with ADHD and autism, and I received late diagnoses for both when I was in my 30s. I'm now 40. I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Late diagnosis is something that I think is common for all of us here today, actually. And we can come back to that as we go through the session. Saskia, did you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Saskia. I'm based in France and my roots are in the Netherlands. Here in France, I'm a teacher, language teacher. I teach English and French. And obviously, I've got ADHD, mixed type. And well, that's it for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, I should introduce myself. So my name is Lottie. My pronouns are she and her. Like the other people here today, I received a late diagnosis of ADHD last year, but I had long suspected that I did have ADHD. I have been in ELT for about 25 years, first as a teacher, and then I moved into publishing, and now I specialise particularly in diverse and inclusive representations of people who are typically underrepresented or marginalised in ELT materials. So today we've got a few different questions that we're gonna talk you through, and as we said, please do put any questions that you might have in the comments. The first thing I thought that we could have a look at is why we think this stereotype persists, and why hyperactivity is so often associated with ADHD above perhaps any other ways that it might manifest. Sarah, did you want to share your ideas here?
Okay, I think it's because hyperactivity, physical hyperactivity is more visible, right? It's like the visible manifestation of a certain type of ADHD. So it's easier to kind of notice and detect. And that's kind of going back to that stereotype of, little kids, especially boys, or, those assigned male at birth who can't sit down in their seat. A little bit like me today, actually. I'm a little bit moving around, so sorry if this is distracting. But this is kind of what we see, and we don't really see the other manifestations, which, if you do have hyperactivity, can also be mental, and that can look like anxious thinking patterns, overthinking, not being able to tell a story in a linear way or answer a question concisely, which is kind of a bit like what I'm doing right now. So I think this is why this is so prevalent, and a kind of misunderstanding of different types of ADHD. Saskia mentioned that she has combined type, which is also what I have, which is inattentive ADHD as well as hyperactive ADHD. And you might not have the hyperactive version, you might have the inattentive part only. So I think it's because it's so visible, perhaps. I'm not sure if Claire or Saskia would want to add anything else to that.
No, go ahead and jump in, Saskia or Claire, if you want to. Oh, you're on mute, Saskia.
Find the button. Thank you. I wanted to ask Claire if she wanted to say something, but I'll go. And I'm lost already. So where was I? I'm trying to listen to you and think and make notes at the same time, because yes, I'm the one that has a hard time to tell the story. Yes, Lottie.
No, I was just we were talking about why we think hyperactivity is associated with ADHD, and Sarah was saying that perhaps it's because it's so physically noticeable, that kind of physical hyperactivity. I wondered if you had anything to add.
It's what you see, and it's what teachers notice in the classroom, and yeah, well, it's what people see. It's what makes us impulsive. It's what makes children sometimes hard to handle, either at home or in the playground or at school, and that's where the problem starts. So that's what you see. That's what you experience as well. So yeah, it's the obvious one to catch.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I guess it's the one that's probably most, obviously troublesome also for teachers and for parents as well. So it's something that they're going to want to address, because it does affect, perhaps classroom management for them, and it's something that they need to deal with.
Can I add? Could I please add one thing straight away, because this one's always overlooked, and I just had a very good conversation about this with my dear friend about her son this morning. It's not just the teachers and the parents, it's the child themselves as well, of him or herself as well. Because of the behavior and the problems they encounter, they're scolded a lot more frequently. Well, you know the drill, but it's on them as well. Very important.
Yeah, no, that's really important to acknowledge that experience is felt by the person with ADHD or who lives with ADHD, and and the the behavior that other people manifest towards them, might be negative, and that could impact on them as well. Claire, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, it's just thinking while listening to you that, ADHD obviously can manifest itself very differently amongst different people. So while hyperactivity may be more evident amongst some ADHDers, it might not be noticeable at all amongst others. But then perhaps there's also the element that it's perhaps one of the things that sets ADHD apart from other neurological differences. You tend not to see hyperactivity so much with other neurological differences. So perhaps that's why people have kind of latched onto that in quite a lazy way, in my opinion. It's focusing on hyperactivity is very much just looking at the surface and not looking at what's going on with the ADHD underneath that. I think it's a shame.
That's a really great point. I was wondering how much masking might come into it as well, because, though you might feel hyperactive, and if you were allowed to physically manifest that hyperactivity, in some cases you might not. I know from my own personal experience that if I hadn't been so constantly masking my own behavior, that I might have actually been perceived as a hyperactive, physically hyperactive child or a physically hyperactive person. I wonder whether anybody wanted to add anything there.
Yeah, that's definitely my experience too. I was definitely like holding it all in and screaming inside. I think what helped me as a child and a young person was that I had hobbies, or I was very into dance and martial arts, for example. So those hobbies gave me the chance to like release that hyperactivity in a constructive way. So that really helped me. But I think it also depends on the kind of how the child is and what environment the child is growing up in. Is the child growing up in an environment where things are very open and you can talk about how you feel and it's okay to let it out? Or perhaps the child and the young person, adult, is in an environment where, it's more, they're encouraged to keep it in. I think that has an effect on how they present.
Yeah. If just to add to that, Claire. So growing up in Wales, right, we were in school. It was awful because you never got up in the classroom. You were just sitting down, doing exercise after exercise. There was no movement involved in our lessons, apart from, if it was physical education or drama or something like that. So in terms of masking, the need to like just get up and move was huge, right? But you had to kind of quash that down and prevent it to the point where maybe it would come out in other ways. So if I look back at me as a child at school, I wouldn't have said, okay, I was physically hyperactive, but I see it more now as an adult where I'm able just to get up and move and do stuff. And it came out in other ways. And there's something called stimming, which I don't know if any of you do, but it could be like a physical stim, which is a repeated movement, right? So for me, it was always like, I used to come to school with like lots of cat scratches and all of this kind of stuff, and it would be playing with this. Or playing with a thread on my school jumper endlessly until it all unraveled, or sort of scrunching up bits of paper or something like that. And the inability to let out that energy kind of resulted in not feeling very good. And actually, there is a comment from Louise, who joined us last week, who says hyperactivity is perhaps also seen through the fact that patience is often low. It's almost a physical need to get involved. You can barely stop it, but when you're forced to, it feels really, really bad. So I don't know. I think if as a child I'd have, I would have been allowed to get up and move and, manipulate things in the classroom or throw a ball to my partner. I don't know, whatever it is. I think it would have been sort of much better. But what ended up happening was a lot of internalization and as a result, a lot of mental hyperactivity, which is a whole other thing, right? I don't know if any of you felt like that. I don't know. I just felt really forced to be still at school in a kind of, it didn't feel great.
Yeah, well, seeing my age, I'm 61. So when I was in primary, the school system was still rather old-fashioned. And what I remember is that I was always moving my toes. I still do, by the way, and biting my lips. And it's not just canalizing the energy, it's also a way of being able to focus, to concentrate. And what helped me is that the last 2 years that I was in primary, they recognized that I was a smart little assy. So they gave me some extra work to do, and that stimulated my brain. So yeah, that helped. It was quite modern for the time. Yeah. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
No, go on. Finish what you're saying, Saskia. No, it's interesting what you were saying about. This is ADHD interruption right here. Sorry, Saskia. Please do finish what you were saying.
I was just wrapping things up, like it doesn't have to be all negative. It can also be positive stimming. It can also be a way of canalizing in the right direction.
And comforting as well. I think it can be emotionally comforting. Yeah, definitely. I have completely forgotten what I was going to say now, which is also very ADHD. It's gone.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's on me. But yeah, no, absolutely. And what I was thinking as all of you were talking was, I still feel some of those things. Well, I still feel those things now, and I'm wondering, that inability to sit still, sitting in a conference talk that's any longer than half an hour is excruciating for me. Sitting through a play, sitting through a film, sitting through, in a cinema, even sitting in meetings can be very, very hard. And actually that use of fidgeting, fidget toys, something to play with, really does aid my concentration. So I'm wondering what your experience might be kind of now, think physically, mentally, as much as you're comfortable sharing. What's your experience of hyperactivity now for you? Who would like to go first?
Claire's turn, I think. Okay. Yeah, what can I say? Well, I work from home most of the time nowadays. So just sitting here essentially. But I have to go get out and have a walk about every hour to an hour and a half or so while I'm working. I go out and have a walk. And if I don't do that, I just cannot continue to concentrate on my work. Like, that's an absolute must. I have been in a few very long meetings lately, online meetings, and that has been not so easy. I just got to the point where I just have to fix my arms in a certain way like this, to just kind of hugging myself almost, to just be able to cope with the not being able to move for such a long time. But yeah, I have to get some movement while I'm working. And I often find that while I'm walking around, moving, that's when I get a lot of clarity and ideas that then help me to get on with my work when I get back. So that's a must for me, yeah. And going to the gym every day, or almost every day. Like, if I don't do that, then I just cannot function, basically. So yeah, I need movement.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like that physical sense of hyperactivity is really present for you there. Does anybody else want to share how they experience hyperactivity?
I can add to the mental hyperactivity bit, I think, because the physical, okay, it's present here and there, but it's not, I would say, my main issue. I don't think. As you said, things like doodling while I'm in a meeting can help. endless doodling all over my planner really helps me focus. But for me, it's the mental hyperactivity that can either be a blessing or a curse. And I'll speak about it first as a curse because I want to get that out of the way. And then I'll go into how I kind of enjoy it. But all right, the worst phrase in the world that anybody can say to me is, "Can we have a chat?" That kills me, because my mental hyperactivity will do this. It's like your brain never stops. So somebody says, "Can we have a chat?" Let's say it's my boss, right? And I think, oh, I did something so bad. What did I do? And I'll go back through, I don't know, years of my professional life trying to figure out what it is that I did. And suddenly hours have passed and I've catastrophized to the point where now I've convinced myself that I'm going to lose my job, that I won't be able to pay the rent. I'm going to be on the street. I'll never be employed again. And when it comes to the meeting, it's just, oh, I was just wondering where you saved those documents about blah, blah, blah. And I've wasted all of this time catastrophizing. Or in relationships, for example, if I get a message saying, "Can we chat?" It's the end of the relationship. You just jump from one thought to another so quickly that you end up within seconds at this kind of, I don't know, this catastrophe state. I don't know if the rest of you do this, but it's not always negative. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Sometimes it can be really creative. So somebody might be talking to me about, I don't know, the price of bread at the shop in the corner has gone up, right? And suddenly I'm thinking of like monkeys in the jungle for some such reason. And I start talking about monkeys or something that I read on monkeys recently. And they're going, "Hang on a second, where did you get this from?" And it's because I've thought of a fruit called monkey bread, which they grow in Senegal. And I read an article about it and I've jumped like 5 topics ahead. And suddenly I'm somewhere else in the conversation. It can seem really random, but I find that quite funny and entertaining, that version of it. And it can also mean that because you're always thinking, you're connecting many different ideas and situations together, which can be quite creative. So it has a really lovely side, and it also has a really damaging side as well. And just the fact that you can't ever switch your brain off, I don't know about the rest of you, but it means that I sleep like I've just died. Like somebody could be next to my bed sort of banging saucepans together. I won't wake up. I don't know if that's to do with mental hyperactivity, but I feel there's some link there with that. Anyway, that's how I experience it in a not so small nutshell.
Oh, that sounds really familiar. Yeah, definitely in both ways, absolutely. And it's funny you talking about, that thinking three or 4 steps ahead of maybe not everybody else, but in your conversation, or in your mind, you've already gone sort of 5 or 6 steps further than the conversation. I'd never thought about that as hyperactivity, but that actually makes an awful lot of sense. Did you want to add anything, Saskia?
I was wondering if, Sarah, if you start to think about all sorts of things that might happen and you have happened in the past, isn't that a part of RSD?
Yeah, that's a good point. That comes into it.
I know that's session 4, so I won't go too deep into it. But
yeah, it's worth mentioning though, right? Because RSD is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and people with ADHD experience this quite a lot. It's where you catastrophize. You do, and you think the worst because you're waiting to be rejected in some way. That's an oversimplification, but yeah, I absolutely think that's that there's a connection there for sure. This kind of going maybe first to the most negative outcome, but I also think it's down to conditioning as well, because I think sometimes we receive fairly negative comments about how we act or how we do things or how we might go and solve a problem. In best case scenario, we might be described perhaps as unconventional, quirky, but often it's, why are you doing things this way? So sometimes that can also have an impact, I think, on this kind of mental hyperactivity. But yeah, for me, it's just not being able to quiet the inner noise, apart from when I do yoga, which is the thing that saves me. You know, if I do yoga, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's really interesting. And
What
sorry.
about hyperfocus? For me, being in my hyperfocus is absolutely mental hyperactivity. I can
never
be there
thought about it
completely.
that way. Yeah. I'd never thought about it that way, but it does make sense. I always think about it as a flip side of kind of the inattentive aspect of ADHD. But you're right that actually that kind of speedy thinking and really clear focus does feel quite kind of like a hyperactive behavior in a way, doesn't it? I wonder.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt.
This
This is what happens when you get a panel of panel of people with ADHD, right? Just endless interrupting. Sorry, because I do want to give Claire a turn as well. But just quickly, I've never thought of it that way either. That hyperfocus, and just to say hyperfocus, we have a session on this coming up, I think, right? It's where you are fascinated by a subject to the point where you just can't stop researching it and hours have passed. But yeah, that's some kind of like mental marathon, right? Which could be it could be to do with hyperactivity.
I had it yesterday, and I was completely negative. But the problem with me is if I go to bed after a whole day of hyperfocusnesses, I can't sleep anymore. So like at midnight, I was still like, it keeps buzzing. Good things going on in there, but how do I go to sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. Does that sound familiar, Claire?
Yeah, unfortunately. But I hadn't, but what is interesting listening to you speak is I hadn't considered this sort of like positive aspect of the mental hyperactivity, in the sense that, yeah, you can catastrophize and go from this could happen and this could happen and this could happen, then I'm homeless kind of thing. But that can also be a positive thing in the sense of, but I could do this and then this would happen and then this, and then we could build it up and then it could become this. So that kind of chain of thoughts can actually be positive in some circumstances. But I think I was just going to say, with sleeping, I think lots of people with ADHD have trouble with sleep one way or the other. So recently I've started taking a herbal supplement, which always helps me to sleep. And that has really had a positive effect on my sleep and then also how I feel during the day. So I think there's no shame in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And my thing I was going to interrupt with is gone now as well. So perfect ADHD. So I was thinking we talked a little bit about that kind of sense of mental hyperactivity and physical hyperactivity. I'm wondering if you're sort of willing to share what impact this had on your education, and perhaps we could also think about some ways that teachers could help people or students who have ADHD to, I don't know, to remove barriers for those students in the classroom. If I think about myself, quite often, unless I was interested in a lesson, I just would assume that I was going to learn nothing in that lesson and that I would learn it later. I don't know whether that sounds familiar, but I just sit there and just go, I'm not going to take anything in. I'll come back and I'll learn about this later myself if I wasn't interested. And certainly I was quite disorganized at school, and I felt that any kind of offer of assistance really felt like criticism to me, and I found that very difficult when I was at school. What about your any thoughts or experiences in terms of education or in terms of how you think we might be able to help students?
I think it's obviously important to not see the hyperactivity amongst school students, not to automatically classify that as naughtiness, obviously, and for teachers to understand that it's not naughtiness, and to ensure that students with ADHD are able to move around or take breaks when they need to. And ideally, the teacher would offer students a choice of activities, if that's possible, or a choice of you know, some kind of flexibility about what they learn and when and how, that would be ideal. But I think above all, though, it's really important that the teacher has can have an open dialogue with the child in question or children, that, you know, that there's that understanding of, you know, like the child feels comfortable with talking to the teacher. If they're having a day where they feel more hyperactive, that they can communicate that, and that, you know, there's just that dialogue about it. You know, that the teacher understands how the child feels and when and why. I mean, that would be ideal.
Yeah, and I suppose giving students the language as well, you know, to be able to describe what's happening to them, and to be able to describe their feelings and their needs as well is really important. Any other thoughts?
Yes, please. As a teacher, I totally agree, but be very careful. You have to include the parents. You can't just organize your ways just with the child in question. You have to absolutely include the parents as well, and they have to agree. Because if you don't, you can be in for a lot of trouble, and you don't want to be there. You just want to help the child. You want to help it feel safe and learn to feel to progress, and you do not want the parents to turn against you. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
just a few things to add. So I think I look at it more from the perspective of, you know, as educators, we're not qualified to diagnose our students, right? So we might see elements, and we might, you know, having ADHD gives you a better insight, obviously, into what the condition can manifest as, but we're not in a position to diagnose, at least myself. You know, some of us have other qualifications and so on, but I think often students are unaware, and the family or the guardians of that student are unaware. And I think as teachers, we can be doing things, we can be implementing certain techniques which do not necessarily only help that student with ADHD or with suspected ADHD. So things like sharing the lesson aims and having those shared in a fun way, like, you know, using a flight path or using a menu or something like that. So you feel a little bit safe, you know where we're going, and periodically returning to those aims and kind of going, so what did we do? How do you feel about it? Do you think you could teach this point to somebody else? Where are we going next? So kind of like signposting is really important. And for me, transitioning, because transitioning from one task to another as someone with ADHD is a nightmare. I was going to say something else, but I'm glad I self-censored that. But it's a nightmare, right? Like you're on one task and then you've got to do another, and moving between A to B is just impossible. So I always try to have a signal, a transition signal. So it could be, you know, we all do them. I think it's stuff that many teachers do. It could be like I clap and then you clap the same beat. And that kind of shows, okay, we're moving on to something else now. Instructions. Please stop with the verbal instructions, everybody. We can't do it. But so, you know, it's not just people with ADHD, it's others. It's people who have dyslexia. It's people who aren't very good at auditory processing. So show us what to do instead of telling us what to do. That's really, really helpful. And then praise, seriously. And this goes back to, I think, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? Praise us excessively, please. I accept all of your praise in the chat box, but no, praise us, but tell us why you're praising us. And it, you know, it doesn't have to be academic. It could be things like, you know, you just helped out your classmate there. That's a really kind thing to do. And how do you think your classmate feels now? I think things like that are things that we can be doing for all students that really do help those with ADHD, and making sure there's a strong context always. Like you know, we're talking about language learning predominantly, I think. But, you know, when we learning and something is decontextualized, it just doesn't go in. But if you set up a story that's really strong and present from beginning to the end, and every single activity is related to this story, then that really, really helps, I think, with us being able to stay motivated and engaged and all of this.
Yeah. I'm thinking as you're saying that, would I have the engagement to follow a whole story? But I guess if it was like, engaging and punchy and broken up, then I probably would. It's about creating that interest and relevance, isn't it? And really engaging the student to keep them interested. Any other thoughts on what we can do for students who have hyperactivity? Because we've talked a little bit about children. I'm wondering about adults, since we're all kind of late diagnosed. What can we do for adults? Would you differ anything that you do for adults, or do you think we can use the same kind of things for adult students?
I've only got private students, not groups, so it's a bit difficult for me to compare. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think adults have the same needs, in the sense that adults also need clear objectives. They need help with transitioning from one task to the other at work or whatever context it is, if it's not work or if it's learning. I think essentially the same things apply to adults.
I can draw on my experiences as a student of Greek, which is already quite hard, right? And you add ADHD to the mix, and it's, I think I struggled a lot when I didn't know why we were doing what we were doing. So, and I didn't know where things were going. So there were always a series of activities that were really form focused, not very creative. It didn't allow for any kind of creative expression. So already I'm feeling kind of, straitjacketed, and I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but, rigid then. And then we go to the next activity and the next activity without any kind of, again, it's transitioning, isn't it, from one stage to another. And then I was left to kind of figure out, okay, is this related to the previous activity? Is this going, where are we going with this? And that used to kind of make me disengage a little bit. And again, with it always comes down to instructions for me. Can you do this and then this, and then when you finish this, you're also going to do this and then this. Well, I've lost you at the first line of that instruction, right? So I don't think it's very different to teaching children. It's just maybe you're using more adult friendly visuals, or I would still like a lesson map. That would be great to see what the objectives are. So I don't think that really differs. Or maybe opportunities, to be able to move around the classroom, work with different people, that kind of thing. I think one thing as well that I kind of forgot to mention earlier is the lack of emotional control sometimes. I know this is something we're going to be speaking about in another session, but sometimes when you have all this pent up hyperactivity, be it physical or mental, it can come out and you're not able to get it out. It can come out in other not so nice ways, right? Frustration, anger, like just mentally checking out of the classroom. So I think sometimes like just having opportunities to check in on how your students are feeling. For children, that could be having different color papers on the desk, and green means I'm doing good, and they just push it to the front. There's no need for dialogue. It's just that they're signaling to you how they're feeling. Or red means, hey, I'm not so good today, so can you, take it easy with me? And setting up maybe a similar system for adults, or, allowing them to express themselves in those ways, so we can see what we can expect of them in a lesson.
May I think a part of RSD is also that you're very sensitive to other people's emotions. And as I said, I've only got private students one-on-one when I work with adults and teenagers as well, by the way. So I capped their emotions very easily. And as soon as I'm under the impression that something's wrong, something's bothering them, that they're acting differently, then I know they can do, that I'm used to, I will open up the conversation. I will start asking questions. Is something wrong? Do you want to talk about it? How are you doing with the lesson? Are you comfortable with this? If it's yes, then we continue. If it's no, then okay, I adapt. I've become really flexible. I can adapt the lesson like on the spot, and I will if I have to. And that has happened on a few occasions that I actually even stopped the lesson because the adult was no longer capable of learning anything. So we just chatted and we did other things. Yeah. So I think I just do this, what you just said before as well, Sarah, that you map the lesson. I think I just do that instinctively. I know when parts of grammar can be boring, but I always tell them, so this part is connected to that, and this is why I'm telling you. And when you understand this, you will have a huge help for that and that. And then I will go, okay. So, yeah.
Really useful. I was thinking as you were speaking, Sarah, that one aspect for me of hyperactivity is when it's very strong, it makes me feel very out of control, actually. I don't know whether that's something that any of you kind of recognize as well. And so if we can imagine that, a student is sitting in class, perhaps with those feelings, then that's an awful lot, isn't it, for them to have to deal with, in addition to any other symptoms they might be feeling, and also trying to take in knowledge from the lesson. So I think all of these bits of advice that you've given, Sarah, Saskia, Claire, are really, really helpful. And I'm sure that there's a lot more we could mention as well. And we will be sharing some links at the end with some tips. We're kind of coming to the end now. So I'm thinking whether we should probably check in and see whether there's anything in the comments that we want to cover before we finish.
There's a couple of things in the comments. So there are some comments about how do you break behavior patterns of students who are, I guess it's physically hyperactive or showing signs of physical hyperactivity that's perhaps disruptive to the rest of the students in the class. The question is, how do you break those behavior patterns? I wonder if we can talk about how do we support those behavior patterns in a way that kind of doesn't marginalize that student but allows them to express. So I wonder if Claire, Saskia, or you, Lottie, have any kind of insight on that.
I think physical movement's good, isn't it? And so if we're thinking about children, giving students responsibility that might require physical movement might be good. So, for example, if you're passing out books, that student, giving them something physical to do and a responsibility within the classroom might be helpful for kind of starting to break that pattern. Any other thoughts or disagreeing with that even?
I'd say one by one. Talk to the child about it and include the parents, and just focus on one, max 2 things at a time, and deal with it in a positive manner. For example, see if you can come to an agreement with the child that you give it a little sign, for example, when it is happening again, to make it aware. But because very often the children aren't even aware of what they're doing. It just happens, right? Yeah. They don't realize that it might be disruptive. So focus on 1 or 2 things, no more, and work on that for a period, and then
yeah. I think I would add that, we all learn differently, and we can all be respectful of how another person likes to learn or likes to be in the classroom. Perhaps doing lessons, they can be quite regular, they inbuilt, which are about how I like to learn, or kind of what helps me learn. And then, if you've got that child who says, I learn, or I remember facts only when I pace around the classroom, but we know this now. So this is how this person likes to learn, so let's allow them to do it. I'm not saying to a point where, that we're allowing people to vocally stim. That's where you repeat a phrase over and over, and that's really disruptive. But kind of saying, okay, what are we allowed to do in terms of our hyperactivity, and what's maybe crossing a boundary because it's impacting on somebody else's learning, and kind of establishing those kind of guidelines very early on with your class. And it could be quite illuminating. You might have other students who aren't diagnosed or maybe don't have ADHD who learn in a similar way, who join in, I think. But it's not about punishment, because punishment leads to these really deep feelings of shame. And I think that goes back to the RSD, the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. There's been questions about this too, Lottie. I don't know if we want to cover it now or another time.
If you want to add anything, go for it.
Anybody?
Oh, okay. Well,
yes, Lottie, I thought Lottie was talking to you, Sarah.
Yeah,
I think she was, but okay. I'm passing the ball. Claire, come in.
Questions about RSD?
Yeah, or comments about it being kind of an interesting thing that's perhaps not really explored. Maybe what it is or how it might look.
It's as the name suggests, it's like an extreme, higher than usual feeling of dread of potentially being rejected in any kind of context, being rejected by your teacher if you're a school student, being rejected by a friend if you're an adult or a child or any age, being rejected by a colleague if you're at work, or an employer if you're at work. And just, yeah, I guess, or for me anyway, obviously I can only speak to my own experience, but for me it's just this extreme, irrational, I know really it's irrational, concern about being rejected, being told that whatever it is not good enough. I'm not good enough as a friend, or good enough as an employee, or good enough as a mother, or whatever it is. It could be any kind of role that you might have. Just this kind of, unfortunately, this sort of morphed view of, I guess it's essentially a morphed view of how other people perceive you, and then a morphed view of how of the potential impacts of the world around you on you. Like, you tend to think, as you mentioned earlier, if someone says they want to have a chat with you, it's instantly like, I'm going to lose my job. And that's obviously going to have a negative effect on you. It could then in that situation, it could have a negative effect on your relationship with your employer, because you could then be super nervous when you have that chat, for example, super like tense, nervous, unhappy, anxious, all of these negative emotions. And those, obviously, the person you're talking to may well not be aware of the fact that you have ADHD, or even if they are, that you're acting like that because you have ADHD, and then that could potentially damage your relationship, say with that employer, or the same is true in any context. It could damage your relationship with a friend, with whoever, with your teacher, with a romantic partner, or whatever it is. So it can potentially, obviously, has a negative effect on your mental health and potentially your ability to sleep. And it can also have a negative effect on your relationships with other people. So it's just generally a bit rubbish.
Yeah. This is why I'm past to Claire, because that was a fantastic summary, Claire. It is rubbish. Yeah. Go on, Lottie.
No, I was going to say, and I think what's also important to acknowledge with it is that it leads to perfectionism, and as you say, it can lead to kind of really obsessively trying to do everything as well as you can, and to a generalized anxiety, I think, that goes along with a lot of our relationships and behaviors.
Yeah, and I think if we bring that back to the classroom, then, I mean, as an adult, I think it manifests as well, everything you said, Claire. It has huge impacts on relationships with people. The inability to take a compliment, or not getting any feeling of satisfaction from a job that you've completed because you feel like you didn't do it perfectly, and all of this kind of stuff. I think if we bring it back to classroom and classroom practice, making sure that we are regularly praising students, but not kind of that rubber stamping sort of thing, but kind of giving very constructive feedback on exactly what they did that went well, and exactly what it is that they need to work on, with getting away from this idea of perfection. And this is where education systems drives me crazy, because it's so much focused on right or wrong answers, I think that kind of fuels this. Whereas if we give tasks where there are different ways of looking at things and kind of praising the creative thought behind that, I think that kind of helps with RSD. And there's a question about whether it can be a standalone thing or whether it just affects those with ADHD. I think it can affect anybody, right? Except that with people with ADHD, it's far more common. It's far more likely that you'll have it. But I think I need to go and double check that.
For me, it's a highly overlooked and underestimated part of ADHD. It's if I remember correctly, it used to be in a DSM-4, and now they've taken it out because they took it out. Excuse me, because they thought it was no longer necessary, and so it's not in the DSM-5. They're now getting back to that idea that it might be a mistake, actually.
Yeah. So I feel like we could probably draw things to a close now, although we could probably talk about this for days and days and days. I think probably we've shared quite a lot of useful tips for the classroom. Before we sign off, is there anything that any of you would like to add to the discussion, either about RSD or about hyperactivity, or perhaps a final kind of nugget that would be useful for people who are watching to take away for their classroom practice?
Yeah, if you're a teacher and you work in primary, a lot of girls, like me when I was a child, when you're very sporty and active, physically active in a good way, in a positive way, doesn't mean that you don't have ADHD. So have a look. Also keep an eye on those that are very physically, that need that sport to canalize their energy.
Last comment, it's not mine, it's Michelle Morgan's in the chat box. She makes a very good point about saying include brain breaks, frequent brain breaks in your classes, and we can also provide a link to some kind of brain gym activities that you can use as a little break in your classroom at the end of this session as well.
Brilliant. And Claire, anything to add?
Nothing really to add. I think it's just so important to keep in mind that when we talk about hyperactivity, it's not just physical hyperactivity, it can also be mental, as a lot of people are not aware of that or overlook it. I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sorry, I've interrupted. Claire, were you finished?
No, it's good. I was finished. Go ahead.
This is the worst thing about my ADHD is a constant interrupting. So I think as well, just finally to bear in mind, lots of praise, positive reinforcement, and also that a lot of the things that we would do for a student with ADHD will, or any other type of specific learning difference or additional need, will generally be good for everybody in the classroom. So before we sign off, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been another really interesting conversation. Next week, we are talking about, I'm not sure, Sarah, what are we talking about next week? Let's have a look.
We've got no idea, do we, Lottie? We're actually talking about...
No, I've got no idea. We're concentration and organisation. Ironically, we're talking about concentration and organisation.
Yeah, exactly. So do join us next week, same time, same place, so we'll try and concentrate for about an hour. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. And thank you especially to Saskia and Claire as well for your valuable insights. We're looking forward to seeing you all same time, same place next week.
Yeah. Bye.